Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 14 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham. This is one of the verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham that is an entirely original verse by Bhagavan. Like the verse we talked about last month, verse 13. Verse 13 was about annihilation of false awareness, I am this body. In other words, annihilation of ego. According to Bhagavan, ego is the root of all problems. So this same idea, he continues in this verse 14. What he says in this verse is, viṇaiyum, vibhatti, viyōgam, aññāṉam, iṇaiyavai, yārkku, eṉṭṛu, āyndiḍalē, viṇaibhatti, yōgam, uṇarvu, āyndiḍa, ṇiṇṭṛi, avai, eṉṛģumiṛā, eṉṛģumiṛā, tāṉ-āha, maṉal-ē, uṇmai. What that means is the first sentence, viṇaiyum, vibhatti, viyōgam, aññāṉam, iṇaiyavai, yārkku, eṉṭṛu, āyndiḍalē, viṇaibhatti, yōgam, uṇarvu. What this means is investigating for whom are such like karma, vibhatti, viyoga, and aññāna is itself karma, bhakti, yoga, and ñāṇa. To understand this in context, we need to understand a little bit of background. That is, generally, all kinds of spiritual practice are classified in four broad groups. Of course, these are not watertight compartments, and there is potential for overlap between them. But essentially, it is karma. That karma in this context means karma means action, and in this context, as a spiritual path, karma means the practice of nishkarmiya karma. That is action done without desire for any particular fruit. That's the first one. Second one is bhakti. Bhakti means devotion, love for God. The third one is yoga. Yoga in this context refers primarily to Patanjali's yoga, the practices that are systemized by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra. Of course, yoga is much older than Patanjali, but it was systemized first by Patanjali. These practices are, that is the aim as explained by Patanjali, the aim of yoga, of the yoga taught by Patanjali. The aim is chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha means yoga is the curbing or stopping of chitta vritti. Chitta vritti, we can say mental activity. So all the movements or activity of the mind must cease. That is the aim of yoga. So yoga is a set of practices, meditation practices, and underpinned by the practice of pranayama, which are all practiced with the aim of bringing about a stilling of all mental activity. But that's the very technical definition of yoga. But more broadly, because these are classifying all the different types of spiritual practice, many practices of Buddhist meditation, many tantric forms of meditation and upasana, they all generally fall under this category of yoga, if we take yoga in a broader sense. And the fourth one is ñāṇa. Ñāṇa means knowledge or awareness. In this context, it means the path of knowledge, that is the path of knowing and being what we actually are by investigating who am I. So these all types of spiritual practice fall more or less in one or other of these four groups. So, and the aim of all these practices is to rectify some problem. The aim of nishkarmiya karma is to solve the problem of karmiya karma. Karmiya karma means action that is done for desire. Desiring some result, we want some action. However, as Bhagavan has made clear in Upadesha, nishkarmiya karma is not possible without bhakti. That is, any action has to have some motivation. So if we're not motivated by desire for the fruit, we must be motivated by something else. And that motivation is love for God. So in verse 3 of Upadesha, where Bhagavan begins to talk about the path of nishkarmiya karma, he begins that verse by saying kartanukkarkum. Kartanukkarkum means done for God. Kartanukkarkum nishkarmiya karma. So nishkarmiya karma, done for God. So we're not doing it for the fulfillment of any desires, but only for the love of God is the idea. That will purify the mind and show the way to liberation, is what Bhagavan says. And then in the subsequent verses, he discusses the various types of nishkarmiya karma. But because Bhagavan links nishkarmiya karma to bhakti, he says there are three types of nishkarmiya karma. There's actions of body, actions of speech, and actions of mind. These are puja, japa, and dhyana. So Bhagavan is explained, and he grades them according to their relative efficacy in purifying the mind in the subsequent verses, in verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. And finally in 8 of Upadesha. But 8 is not dealing with karma, but dealing with when so long as we are meditating on God as something other than ourselves, that is a karma. When we understand that God is what is shining in our heart as I, and therefore meditate on him as nothing other than I, that's what Bhagavan is talking about in verse 8. That is where the karma ceases, because when we meditate on ourselves, that is the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself, but to subside and dissolve back into its source by attending to itself. So if we attend to nothing other than ourselves, which is what Bhagavan means by ananya bhava, the meditating mind will thereby subside and all action will cease. So meditating on whereas meditating on anything other than ourself is an action, meditating on ourself is a cessation of action. So the path of karma, of nishkarmiya karma, is to rectify the problem of, at the most superficial level, is to rectify the problem of karmiya karma, action done with desire. But actually, there's a deeper problem than this. So long as we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as the doer of actions. That is, doership is nothing but ego, because as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, in which the term body includes all the 5 sheaths. So it includes the mind, and therefore it also includes the speech. So whatever actions are done by mind, speech, or body are experienced by us as actions done by us. So deeper than the problem of desire with which we do action, the deeper problem is the kartrutvam, the doership with which we do action. Because our only connection to action is through the doership. If we don't have a sense of doership, then we have nothing to do with action. So doership is the root problem. So that is what the path of karma is attempting to, is aimed to address. The path of bhakti is, if we follow the path of bhakti, the problem we come up against is our lack of love for God, or our insufficient love for God. If we had all-consuming, heart-melting love for God, we wouldn't ever think of anything other than God. Our mind would be fixed on him solely. But because we have strong vishaya vasanas, inclination to seek happiness in things other than ourselves, our mind is constantly going outwards. So the lack of love is what makes this path of bhakti necessary. Our lack of love for God, who is our own being, makes this path of bhakti necessary. Yoga, the term yoga is often translated as union, and people often think the aim of yoga is union with God or union with our real nature. But that is not the sense in which the term yoga is generally used. In fact, in Patanjali's yoga is based on the philosophy of Sankhya. The philosophy of Sankhya is a dualistic philosophy in which there are two basic things. There's Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha means ourself as awareness, and Prakriti means all the objects of awareness, everything that we know. So obviously all the objects of the world come under, all physical objects come under the heading of Prakriti, but not only the physical objects, all the mental objects. That is everything that all the mental, all the chitta vrittis, all the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the perceptions, the likes, dislikes, these are all phenomena, all things experienced by us. So these all come under Prakriti. Purusha is just the mere awareness. So the aim of yoga is not to unite with anything, but to separate ourselves as awareness from all other things. That is the aim of yoga. So yoga is actually not about union, but about separation. There's also a very nice definition of yoga given by Krishna in the Gita. I just looked it up before we started. It's in verse 23 of chapter 6. Krishna defines yoga as dukkha samyoga viyōgam yoga. What that means is dukkha is dissatisfaction or unhappiness or suffering. Dukkha samyoga is the union with that suffering. Dukkha samyoga viyoga is separation from our union with suffering. So when we rise as ego, we unite ourselves with suffering, so to speak. So the aim of yoga is to separate ourselves from that false union with suffering. So that's a beautiful definition of yoga, but Krishna gives in the Gita. Dukkha samyoga viyōgam yogam. So yoga is not the union, it's the separation of ourselves from the suffering, from our union with suffering. So to translate yoga as union in this context is not really representing what yoga is about. Yes, yoga means joining, yoking, harnessing. So it can also mean union, but that's not the sense in which it's used in a spiritual context. As I say, in Sankhya and yoga, their aim is not to unite with God or with anything else. But in fact, in Sankhya, there's no concept of God at all. In yoga, Patanjali mentions God in the Yoga Sutra, but only as a means rather than as an end. So the aim of yoga is not union with God. It's also not union with our real nature, because we are always one with our real nature. According to ñāṇa, the aim of yoga, the aim of spiritual practice, is not to unite with anything, but to know ourselves and thereby recognize that we are ever one with the one reality, namely Brahman. So our aim is not to unite with Brahman, but to remain as Brahman, to cease rising as ego. When we rise as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves from our own being, from Brahman. ceasing to rise as ego is not uniting, but just ceasing to separate ourselves. So the aim of yoga is to deal with that false sense of separation. The sense in which yoga is usually used, particularly in Patanjali. Patanjali is, yoga often means meditation. It's meditation in the sense that we are yoking our mind to the object of our meditation. If we're meditating on an object, or if we're seeking some aim from if we have some target for our meditation, target either in the sense of what we are meditating on or what we are meditating for, we are yoking our mind to that. So in that sense, meditation is yoga. So yoga in its broadest sense means any type of spiritual practice, because any type of spiritual practice, we have to yoke ourselves to that practice. We have to harness ourselves, harness the mind to that practice. But yoga is to solve this problem of viyoga. The yoga we can take in this context to mean either our failure to harness our mind to the object of our meditation, or in a deeper sense, the seeming separation that occurs when we rise as ego. And the aim of ñāṇa is very simple. ñāṇa means knowledge. The aim of ñāṇa is to remove aññāṇa. So since these four paths are, very broadly speaking, seeking to rectify four defects. The four defects are kamya karma, vibhatti, which in this context means separation. In this context means lack of devotion. That is, vibhatti generally, usually the word vibhatti means separation. But in this context, Bhagavan is using the word vibhatti as an antonym of bhakti. So it means the opposite of devotion, the lack of devotion, the non-devotion. So that's what vibhatti means in this context. But even when we take it to mean non-devotion, it also indirectly refers to separation, because the reason that we seem to be separate from God is because of our lack of love for him. So long as we don't have love for him, it's our lack of love for him that is sustaining our seeming separation from him. So to the extent to which we cultivate bhakti, love for God, the seeming separation between ourselves and God, that gap of separation is closed to the extent to which we have bhakti. We come close to God to the extent to which we love him. Though, of course, God is always actually our own real nature, we seem to be separated from him because we've risen as ego. And as ego, we have so much love for things other than ourselves. So our mind is going outwards, and we are going away from God, so to speak, by going outwards. To come close to God, we have to have great love to turn back within. So bhakti is to solve the problem of vibhatti, yoga is to solve the problem of viyoga, and ñāṇa is to solve the problem of aññāna. But what Bhagavan says here, that is, Bhagavan has correctly diagnosed what is the root cause of all problems, whatever type of problem we may face. What is the root cause of it? The root cause of it is ego. So any defects we may have, such as kamya karma, vibhatti, viyoga, aññāna, these defects exist for us only so long as we rise as ego. It's only in waking and dream that we experience action, and we do action for fulfillment of our desires. It's only in waking and dream that we experience a lack of love for God because of our love for other things, our desire to experience other things, our inclination to seek happiness in things other than ourselves. That is what leads to the lack of love for God. That we experience only in the waking state. The yoga, the failure to fix our mind on the object of its meditation, or our our separation resulting from our rising as ego, that occurs only in waking and dream. Aññāna, ignorance, also exists only in waking and dream, because aññāna is nothing but ego. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. It's the false awareness, I am this body, that prevents us being aware of ourselves as we actually are. Because what we actually are is just I am, not I am this or I am that, just I am. So the aññāna in the form of ego is nothing, is ignorance that we seek to overcome by knowing ourselves as we actually are. So, but for whom, since this karma, vibhatti, viyoga, and aññāna, since they rise and stand only in waking and dream, when we rise and stand as ego, they all exist only for ego. When in sleep, we don't rise as ego, therefore we don't experience any karma, we don't experience any vibhatti, we don't experience any viyoga, we don't experience any aññāna. So what Bhagavan says in this first sentence is investigating for whom are such like karma, vibhatti, viyoga, aññāna. When he says such like, the word he uses in Tamil is iṇaiyavai. Avai means those. Iṇaya means like, those like, such like. So in this context, it refers to defects. That is, these are 4 defects that Bhagavan specifies here, but this applies to whatever defects we can think of. All defects exist only for us as ego. So investigating for whom or to whom, that is, in the word Bhagavan uses for whom or to whom is yārkku. That is the dative form of ya, which means who. So we can take it, according to the context, we can take it to mean to whom or for whom. I mean, but essentially they mean the same. So investigating for whom are such like karma, vibhatti, viyoga, and aññāna. Investigating for whom means investigating ourselves as ego, for whom all these exist. But it's only for us as ego that these exist. So investigating for whom means turning our attention away from all these defects back towards the I who has these defects. So it's investigating for whom means turning our attention back towards ourselves. And that turning of our attention back towards ourselves, that Bhagavan says is itself karma, bhakti, yoga, and ñāna. Why is this? As I mentioned earlier, Bhagavan made it clear that the nature of ego is that is, ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without grasping form, as he says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. An easy way of saying it is that ego rises because of grasping form. But obviously, ego must exist in order to grasp form. So it's not that ego rises because of grasping form, but without grasping form, ego cannot rise. That is the very nature of ego. As soon as we rise as ego, we do so grasping form. So Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. That is the first form that ego grasps, is the form of a body, which is, as Bhagavan clarified in verse 5 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, it's a form of 5 sheaves. That means, well, when Bhagavan talks about body, he's not just talking about the physical form of the body, because we never experience this physical form in isolation from the other 4 sheaves. Because when we experience ourselves as I am this body, the body that we experience as ourselves is always a living body. So that the life means the prana. So we always experience this body in combination with prana, in combination with the life force that animates it. Moreover, we never experience a sleeping body as ourself. It's always a waking body. Even in dream, when we're dreaming, the body that we experience as ourselves seems to be a waking body. We seem to be awake when we're dreaming. So in a waking or dreaming body, whichever way you want to describe it, it amounts to the same. We always experience not only the physical form of the body and the life that animates it, but also the mind, intellect, and will that function within it. So these five are what Bhagavan refers to collectively as the term body. That's why in verse 5 of Uڵḷadu he says, Uru Panchakos Uru. The body is a form composed of 5 shields. Therefore, all five are included in the term body. So when Bhagavan is talking about body, he's referring to the 5 shields. So the first form we grasp as soon as we rise as ego is a body consisting of 5 sheaths. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we project and experience a body as I. When we are dreaming, for example, we never know the exact moment at which the dream starts. But as soon as the dream starts, we experience ourselves as a person within that dream, as a body within that dream, a body consisting of 5 sheaths. So as soon as we rise as ego, simultaneous with our rising, we project and grasp a body as I. And we cannot stand as ego for a moment without grasping this body as I. That's why Bhagavan says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. That is, having grasped the form of a body as I, the mind is then constantly, the mind means ego, is constantly going outward and grasping other forms. Grasping means attending to. So we are constantly knowing things other than ourselves. This knowing of things other than ourselves, both the physical forms of the world and all the mental phenomena that seem to be within our mind, grasping these things is the food on which we as ego survive and flourish. So he said, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. That is, from ego cannot stand for a moment without grasping form, without grasping things other than itself. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping things other than itself. That is, being aware of or attending to things other than itself. So if instead of attending to anything other than itself, if ego attends to itself, what happens? Tedinal otum pidicum, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. If seeking, it takes flight. What does it seeking mean? In this context, it means its ego seeks itself. If it seeks to know its own reality, or it seeks to see who am I, it will take flight. It'll run away. What does he mean by it will take flight or run away? He means it will subside and dissolve back into its source. So to the extent to which we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are nourishing and sustaining ourselves as ego. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are bringing about the subsidence and dissolution of ourselves as ego. So when he says, investigating for whom are such like, karma, vibhatti, viyōgam, and ñāṉa, that means when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, what happens? We subside. When we subside, when we as ego subside, all our karma, bhakti, vibhatti, and viyōgam, and aññāṇam, they all subside along with us because they exist only for ego. They cannot remain without ego. So when we investigate for whom are all these things, we as ego subside, and that subsidence of ego is the true path of karma, bhakti, yoga, and aññāṇa. As he says very clearly in Upadesha Undiyya, verse 10. In verse 10 of Upadesha Undiyya, he expresses it very beautifully. Udita idatil odungi iratal, adu karmamum bhaktiyum undipara, adu yogam ñāṇamum undipara. What that means is, udita idatil means in the place of rising, the place from which one rose. Odungi means subsiding or dissolving. So subsiding and dissolving in the place from which we rose. Iṛital. Iṛital means being. Iṛital here is a verbal noun. Odungi is an adverbial participle. So we first have to subside and dissolve in order to just be as we actually are. And by just being as we actually are, that is subsiding and just being in the place from which we rose. The place from which we rose is what? Our own being. That is, whether we rise or don't rise, we always are. So our being is the underlying substratum, the ground, the adhisthana, the ādhara, from which we rise and into which we subside. So when we investigate ourselves, when we turn our attention towards ourselves, we thereby subside back into the udita idam, the place from which we rose. And that subsidence and just being as we actually are, that is karma, that is bhakti, that is yoga, that is ñāṇa. In what sense? Because the ultimate aim of all these other spiritual practices is to deal with these problems of karma, vibhatti, viyoga, ñāṇa. All these are automatically removed when we attend to ourselves, because when we attend to ourselves, we subside and they all subside along with us. So the aim of karma, bhakti, yoga, and ñāṇa, all these four paths, the aim and purpose of these four paths is perfectly fulfilled simply by investigating for whom are all these problems. So this is such a beautiful, beautiful verse. And I mean, this is the very essence of Bhagavan's teaching here. I mean, when he says iṇaiyavai, he's not limiting this just to karma, vibhatti, viyoga, ñāṇa. Any problem we may have, for whom is sin? We may feel we are a sinner. For whom is this sin? For whom are bad actions? For whom are good actions? For whom are all the problems? For whom is all this suffering? For whom is all this birth and death and all these things? It all comes back to ego. It's only when we rise as ego that we experience all these problems. When we do not rise as ego, as we know from sleep, we face no problem at all. However much we may be suffering in waking and dream, when we fall asleep, we are instantly relieved of all our problems. And so long as we remain asleep, we are free of the problem. The only problem with sleep is that it's short-lived, because sleep is not a state of mano-nasa, it's a state of maṉal-ē. So as Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadesha, there are two types of dissolution of mind, laya and nasa. What is subsided in laya will rise again. What is destroyed in nasa, if it dies in nasa, it will not rise again. So our aim is to bring about the permanent dissolution of ego. Sleep is just a temporary dissolution. It's a state of laya. Even the yogic samadhi, the kevala nirvikalpa samadhi that yogis aim to achieve, that is a state, as Patanjali says, it's a state of chitta-vritti nirodha. But as what Bhagavan implies in verse 13, there are two states of chitta-vritti nirodha. There's laya and nasa. Laya is temporary, so sleep is temporary. Nirvikalpa samadhi is temporary. The permanent solution we are looking for is mano-nasa. That is the dissolution of ego. And the dissolution of ego can only be brought about by ñāṇa, because ego is the false awareness, the aññāṇa, I am this body. So we can remove this false awareness, this wrong awareness, this erroneous awareness of ourselves, only by correct awareness of ourselves. And of course, in order to gain that correct awareness of ourselves, we need bhakti, we need all-consuming love, because in order to investigate ourselves and thereby to be in the place from which we rose, that is the state of surrender, complete surrender. And in order to surrender ourselves, we need to have all-consuming love, because without love, we will never surrender ourselves. So, but that's why Bhagavan often said, bhakti is the mother of ñāṇa. So we cannot attain liberation without ñāṇa. Without ñāṇa means being aware of ourselves as we actually are. And we can't be aware of ourselves as we actually are without all-consuming love or bhakti. So the essence of all spiritual practices is bhakti and ñāṇa. Bhakti is what leads to ñāṇa. That's why Bhagavan often said bhakti is the mother of ñāṇa. And so this investigating to whom are all these problems, that itself is the greatest love, because when we investigate ourselves, we are thereby subsiding. Bhagavan makes it very clear in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Ahandayundayin anatumundaham. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandayin drail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything here means all phenomena, all problems, all this karma, vibhatti, viyoga, aññāṇa, and such like. Everything, all, whatever problems we face, all phenomena, all objects, anything other than ourselves, it all comes into existence only when we rise as ego. When we do not rise as ego, as in sleep, nothing exists. Therefore, Bhagavan says, āyndiḍa-yābamam. Ego itself is everything. That is, when we rise as ego, we as ego see ourselves as all of this. So all of this ultimately is just ego. And then he concludes that verse 26 by saying, Āyndiḍal yādu entu nādalē uvadal yāvameno. Therefore, know that investigating what this is, what this ego is giving up everything. Because when we investigate ego, ego will subside, and everything else will subside along with it, because nothing can exist without ego. So he's implying the same in this verse. When we investigate for whom are all these problems, ego will subside, and all these problems are solved. That itself is the true aim and purpose of all types of spiritual path, of spiritual practice, karma, bhakti, yoga, and ñāṇa. And then, so that's the first sentence of this verse. The second sentence of the verse, he says, the second sentence is very, is almost sutra-like in its brevity. He says, āyndiḍa, when one investigates, ṇiṇṭṛu avai eṇḍṛum. Without I, they never exist. So what does he imply by this? That is, when we investigate ourselves, the one for whom all these problems exist, this I for whom all these problems exist will subside. And in the absence of I, all these problems, karma, vibhatti, viyoga, aññāṇa, and any other type of problem we can think of, that's why he says iṉaiyavai, such like, these never exist. All these problems seem to exist only because we have risen as ego. And the solution to rising as ego is investigating ourselves, because when we investigate ourselves, so long as we attend to anything else, we are feeding and nourishing ego. But when we turn our attention back towards ourselves to see who am I, to investigate what we actually are, this ego will die, this ego will subside, and without ego, these problems will not exist. So in these āyndiḍa nān iṉṭṛi avai eṇḍṛum. These 6 words, Bhagavan summarized the whole of his teachings. If we investigate ourselves, this I will cease to exist, and all problems will cease to exist along with it. So what actually is the ultimate truth? That is what he says in the final sentence. Tāṉ-āha maṉal-ē uṇmeyam. That means tāṉ-āha means as oneself. Tān is oneself. Aha is it's actually an infinitive, meaning to be, but it's the infinitive in Tamil is often used adverbially. So tāṉ-āha means being oneself or as oneself. Maṉal-ē means being permanent. So being permanent as oneself. And maṉal means being permanent. Maṉal-ē the A is an intensifier, but implies only. So only being permanently as oneself is what is true. What he means by this is what is actually true is that we are always as we actually are. We never actually rise as ego. It's only in the view of ourself as ego that we seem to have risen as ego. But if we investigate ourselves and thereby bring about the permanent dissolution of ego, it will then be clear that we never actually rose as ego, because we always are and always were and always will be just what we are. So only being permanently as ourself is what is true or what is real. So this verse summarizes the whole of Bhagavan's teachings. It makes it very clear why Bhagavan always insisted all that is necessary is to investigate ourselves. Investigating ourselves is the path of ñāṇa. It's also the path of bhatti, because investigating ourselves means surrendering ourselves. And since it brings about, if we take yoga to be chitta vritti nirodha, the cessation of mental activity, if we try and bring about the cessation of mental activity, we will attain, if we follow the path of Patanjali, we will attain kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, which is cessation of the mental activity, the chitta vritti nirodha. But it's only temporary. If we want to bring about the permanent chitta vritti nirodha, we need to know what we actually are, because it's only by knowing what we actually are that we will annihilate the aham vritti, the ego. The aham vritti is the first vritti, for whom all other vrittis exist. So trying to bring about the cessation of other thoughts can only be a temporary solution. We need to cut the root. The root of all chitta vrittis is aham vritti, the I vritti, in other words, ego, this I that is aware of itself as I am this body. And this I for whom all these defects such as karma, vibhatti, viyōgam, and aññāṇa exist. So we bring about the permanent chitta vritti nirodha by means of self-investigation. And if we take yoga to mean what Krishna defines yoga to be in the Bhagavad Gita, actually he gives several definitions, but if we take this one definition, dukkha samyoga viyoga yogam, that is, yoga is the separation from the union with suffering. Since we are united with suffering only when we rise as ego, if we bring around about the permanent dissolution of ego, that is yoga. So this path of self-investigation is the ultimate path of yoga. That is the permanent cessation of chitta vrittis. There is only one way to bring it about, and that is made clear by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 6, verse 25, I think it is. He says, in the last the last two parts of the verse, 2 quarters of the verse, he says, Atma samstam mana kritva na kinchitape chintayat. That means fix the mind on yourself. Do not think of anything else whatsoever. So that is chitta vritti nirodha, but the means to bring about that chitta vritti nirodha is by fixing our mind on ourselves. So the path of yoga can be brought to a permanent conclusion only by means of self-investigation. This is what Bhagavan makes clear in verse 14 of Upadesha Undiyā. I'll just go back a little. 11 and 12, he talks about pranayama, and he said that when the mind is controlled, the prana is controlled, and when prana is controlled, mind is controlled. But that controlled means it's bringing about its cessation. But there are 2 types of cessation or dissolution of mind, lēya and nāsa. If it is ceased in lēya, if it is dissolved in lēya, it will rise again. If its form has died, it will not rise. That's what he says in verse 13. And then in verse 14, he says, that is, naturally after we hear verse 13, we understand our aim should be to bring about nasa, the permanent dissolution. So how to bring that about? Bhagavan answers that question in verse 14. He says, Oduka valiye odungum ullate. That means the mind which will be restrained, or which will subside, or which will dissolve when one restrains the breath. But ullate is there. That's all a description of ullate. Ullam in this context means mind. Ullate is the accusative case, so that is the object of the sentence. So, Oduka valiye odungum ullate vidakave or vari undi para vium adon uru undi para. What that means is vidakave means when one sends or when one releases, when one, like if you release an arrow towards its target. So when you send it on that or vari is often translated as one path. That's one meaning of it, but it also has a deeper meaning. That or can mean is a form of oru, which means one. But or is also the root of a verb that means to investigate or know. So often in poetry, Bhagavan uses the root of a verb in place of an adjectival participle. So orvari here means orumvari, the path of investigating. The path of investigating implies the path of self-investigation. So only when one sends the mind, which will be restrained when one restrains the breath, on the investigating path, will its form perish. It's not actually necessary, it's clear from this, but restraining the breath is not necessary. That is, we restrain the breath, will thereby restrain the mind. But the restraint of the breath will, both the mind and the breath will be brought about automatically simply by sending the mind on the investigating path. In other words, turning the mind back within to see who am I. That will bring about not just the temporary cessation, but the permanent cessation of mind. But that's why he says, only when one sends the mind on the investigating path will its form perish. In the Sanskrit version of this verse, he uses the word ekachintana. Ekachintana means, eka means one, chintana means thought. So ekachintana means by thinking, by one thinking. But what it means, what it implies here, eka in advaita, what is one? Ekam eva advaitiyam, one only without a second. The one thing that actually exists, as Bhagavan says in the 7th paragraph of ṉāṇa, yatatamai ulladu atmasarupam andre. What actually exists is only atmasarupa. So here eka is referring to that one, the one that alone exists, namely our own existence. So ekachintana here means Atma-chintana, because Atma alone is the one. So by Atma-chintana, mind will attain nasa, he says. So why I went into that digression is just to say, but yoga, without self-investigation, yoga will result only in maṉal-ē. If we want to bring about the permanent chitta-vritti nirodha, the permanent dukkha samyoga viyōgam, the only way is self-investigation. So that is true yoga. And by investigating ourselves, we as ego thereby subside. When ego subsides, its doership will subside along with it, because there can't be any doership without ego. So the problem of karma is also solved by this. So all the four paths are perfectly, the aim and purpose of all the four paths is fulfilled simply by investigating who am I. Because when one investigates, I will cease to exist, and without I, all these defects can never exist. And then the truth will be clear but only being permanently, being as we actually are, alone is the eternal truth. Even now, the truth is that we are as we actually are. The problem is that because we seem to have risen as ego, we seem to have so many problems. If we investigate this ego, Manatinuruve Maravadu Chava Manamenamonjile Undipara Markam Nerakam Idundipara, as he says in verse 17 of Upadeshundya. When one investigates the form of the mind, that is ego, without forgetting. In other words, I mean, be vigilantly keep our attention fixed firmly on ourselves. Manamenum ondrile. There's no such thing as mind at all. And if the mind seems to exist, mind here means ego, mind seems to exist only so long as we're looking outwards. If we look back within, there's no such thing as mind to be found. Tedinal otum piticum, it's sought, it takes flight. So if we investigate ourselves without forgetting, if we hold on to that self-attentiveness so firmly, it will be clear that there's no such thing as mind at all. Ākam nerakam idundipara. This is the direct path for everyone, he says. So in all these verses, Bhagavan is digging in again and again. But all we need to do is to attend to ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, we solve all problems. But in order to attend to ourselves requires supreme love, because attending to ourselves means giving up everything. So until we are willing to surrender ourselves, which entails surrendering everything else entirely, we will not go deep enough in this path of self-investigation. This path of self-investigation is the easiest of all paths, as Bhagavan makes clear in Anma Viddai. But it seems to us to be difficult because we are not yet willing to surrender ourselves. It's that lack of willing to surrender ourselves, which is vibhatti in the sense of non-devotion. That is the whole problem. And that problem we can overcome only by patient and persistent practice. Because by patient and persistent practice, we thereby weaken the Vishaya vasanas and strengthen the Satvasana. Vishaya vasana is the inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. The Satvasana is the love to attend to our own being. That is true bhakti. So Bhagavan ties up the whole spiritual path so beautifully in this verse, as he does in so many other verses. So this verse, if we understand what Bhagavan is saying here in any of these verses, but when we view each of these verses in the light of other verses, as today I've referred to so many other verses, which all help us to understand what Bhagavan is saying in this verse. And what he says in this verse helps us to understand what he's saying in other verses. So if we understand all these things correctly, it is very clear that all we need to do is to persevere in this simple practice of attending to ourselves more and more and more. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana. I mentioned, but there's another definition that Krishna gives in the Gita. I can't remember where it is. Another definition Krishna gives of yoga in the Gita. He says yoga it's usually translated in English as skill in action. What is the greatest skill in action is to not rise as ego. If we don't rise as ego, then if any action is to go on, let it go on. But we will be being as we actually are. That is the greatest skill in action. Not rising to do anything is the greatest skill in action. So whatever definition of yoga we take, it's all nothing to, it all amounts to it, not letting this ego rise, bringing about the permanent dissolution of ego, which we can do only by investigating who am I, to whom are all these problems.
So there's a question. Michael, you said in your talk that yoga implies separation and not union. Could you please expand on this? implies separation, why call it yoga? But also this question is from the center. Oh, they're back on. There we go. So yeah, I guess you can answer that. They can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. It's not me who said that yoga is separation. It's Krishna who says yoga is separation. He said yoga is separation from the union with suffering. So, but yeah, yoga can mean union, but yoga means joining, bringing things together. That often is translated as yoking or harnessing. Like in a bullock cart, when you've got two bullocks, you yoke them to the bullock cart, you harness them to the bullock cart. But because one of the meanings of yoga is union, and people generally think, oh, union in a spiritual context, it means union with God. But actually in yoga philosophy, that is not the aim. The aim is not to unite with God. The aim is to separate yourself as Purusha from Prakriti. The aim in yoga is said to be kaivalya. Kaivalya is a word, but it's not only in yoga. In all schools, they talk of kaivalya as a synonym often for moksha. But what kaivalya means, it comes from the verb kevala, which means to be alone. So kaivalya means isolation. And this is the aim in yoga, is to isolate yourself as Purusha from all of Prakriti. Even in ñāṇa, what is our aim? All these phenomena appear only when we rise as ego. So long as we're attending to phenomena, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. So we have to isolate ourselves from these phenomena by turning our attention back within. When we turn our attention back within, ego will thereby subside, all phenomena will thereby subside, and we'll be left alone. So it's not whichever way we look at it, yoga is not about uniting with anything, it's about separating ourselves from everything. In the path of ñāṇa, we are separating ourselves from the aññāṇa, which is ego. And how do we do that? By subsiding back into our source. In the path of yoga, they're trying to separate themselves from Prakriti. Yoga is based on a different philosophy. It's not based on Advaita philosophy, it's based on Sankhya, which is a dualistic philosophy, because according to Sankhya, there are two independent realities. There's, on the one hand, there's Purusha, which means awareness, and on the other hand, there's Prakriti, which is all phenomena. In yoga, they believe, in Sankhya, they believe that the Prakriti, the phenomena, exist independent of awareness. But when it's independent of awareness, it's then avyakta, it's non-manifest. So it becomes manifest only when Purusha and Prakriti are united. So the aim is to separate them. In Advaita, the principal difference between Advaita and Sankhya is, whereas Sankhya takes the Prakriti to have an independent reality, according to Advaita, Advaita tends not to use the same terms, but if we put it in Sankhyan terms, we can say the Prakriti has no existence independent of Purusha. That is, objects of awareness have no existence independent of the awareness that knows them. And the awareness that knows them is not the original awareness, but only the adjunct conflated awareness called ego. So as ego, we need to separate ourselves from all adjuncts. As Bhagavan says, for example, in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, knowing oneself without adjuncts. The word he uses for without is vittu. That means leaving, letting go of all adjuncts. Knowing oneself, letting go of all adjuncts, is itself knowing God. God means what we actually are, because God shines as oneself. So whatever way we look at it, we have to separate ourselves from all that is unreal in order to remain as what is real, which is ourself. So whether we're viewing it from a point of view of Advaita philosophy or from the point of view of yoga, Sankhya and yoga philosophy, our aim is to separate ourselves, not to unite with anything. That's what I said. And as I say, Krishna plays on this idea very beautifully by defining yoga as the separation from the union with misery.
Selvi is asking a question. Vibhatti and viyōgam literally means separation.
Yes.
So by self-investigation, we are uniting back to the source.
Yes.
Even though the source is always one, but due to the seeming appearances, I was seemingly separated, and by self-investigation, I united. Can we explain this verse in this way also?
Yes, we can, but we need to understand the separate. Yes, now we seem to be separate, but this separation is never real. So we are not. That is the central truth of one of the central truths of Advaita is Jiva Brahmaikya. Aikya means oneness, the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. Even now we are one with Brahman. Because we have risen as ego and identified ourselves as a body, as Jiva we seem to be separate, but the separation, even when we seem to be separate, we are never actually separate. So if we talk about union, it implies that two things are separate. So it's giving, the word union is giving reality to the separation. But in this path of ñāṇa, we are investigating ourselves in order to see that separation had never occurred in the first place. So it's not wrong to take it as a union. If we want to take it in that way, there's no harm in taking it in that way. But that is not, that translation of that popular translation of yoga as union doesn't actually represent the philosophy that underlies yoga or Advaita.
So
there's no wrong in taking it that way. It's just we need to understand a little bit more the context in which these words are used to understand their meaning a bit more deeply.
All right. So Michael, you quoted a Gita verse defining yoga as being separation from misery. What verse is that? Chapter and verse?
Chapter 6, verse 23.
Chapter 6, verse 23. Okay.
Bhagavan hasn't translated that verse, but he translated a few verses later, 625 and 626. Those two verses he translated in Bhagavad Gita Saram. 625 is the verse in which Krishna begins by saying, "Sanai, sanai," gradually, gradually. We need to establish our mind. Wait a second, I'll see if I can get the meaning of the verse. Oh, yes, yes. Verse 25, he says, "Sanai, sanai uparamed." Sanai, sanai means gradually, gradually, slowly, slowly. Uparamed means, well, according to this translation, it means attain peace. I think I've forgotten now what uparamed means exactly. Buddhya driti gritaya, by firmness of intellect. I'll take what Bhagavan's Tamil translation.
I'll read your translation of Bhagavad Gita 625. It is necessary by a courage-imbued intellect to gently, gently, calmly and gradually make the mind achieve motionlessness. Great charity, fix the mind, that is your attention, on or in Atman, yourself. Do not think even the slightest of anything else at all. That is 625.
Yes. What Bhagavan, this chittate anma vilse tidika, that's Bhagavan's translation of Atma samstam mana kritva. Atma samstam means fixed in Atma, fixed in oneself. Mana, mind, kritva, having made the mind fixed in oneself, na kinchitapi chintayat, do not think of anything else at all. But in Tamil, he says it even more forcibly, matredubam, anything else, iṇaiyavai, even the slightest, āyndiḍa, do not think of anything else, even in the slightest. So we need to just keep our attention fixed firmly in ourselves and thereby not think of anything else whatsoever.
Right. And that is possible.
In the next verse, he says, from wherever the
whatever the mind which is always wavering without any steadiness grasps, and wherever it consequently wanders, drawing that mind back from that and fixing it on or in Atman yourself, make it always steady.
Yeah.
Right?
One interesting thing about chapter 6 is of Bhagavad Gita. This is the chapter where he's talking about yoga, the practice of yoga. That is the yoga as it's understood, more or less like a Patanjali type yoga. But the heart of this, where he's describing this practice, in these two verses, he's emphasizing how to bring about this fixing of the mind only by fixing it on ourselves. If we fix the mind on any object, which is what they tend to do in yoga. I mean, even Patanjali, he suggests fixing the mind, for example, on Om. He gives there are many things in Yoga Sutra, but one of them is fixing the mind on Om. But so long as we fix the mind on anything other than ourselves, we are not cutting the root, which is ego. We can cut the root only by fixing our mind on ourselves alone. Krishna, that's why it's so important that Krishna, in these two verses, 25 and 26 of this chapter, emphasizes keeping the mind fixed on oneself. And that's why Bhagavan translated these two verses. So how to bring about the separation of now we are united with misery. How to bring about the separation from that union with misery? Only by fixing our mind on ourselves. So if we understand Bhagavan's teachings, it throws so much light on all the ancient teachings of Vedanta. Bhagavan has clarified in so many ways. And also in Gita is like all the main texts of Vedanta, the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutra and the Gita, these texts give room for many different interpretations deliberately, because they're meant to cater for us at different stages of our spiritual development. So at different stages of spiritual development, we'll take different things from the Gita. But if we understand Bhagavan's teachings, then we can understand it puts the teachings of the Gita, for example, I mean, it puts all teachings of the Upanishad, teachings of the Gita, it puts it all in perspective. So we can see what are the real important teachings if we want to go deep into spirituality. There are many other teachings in Gita, which are also very good teachings, but they're for us at different stages of our spiritual development. But if we are aspiring to reach the ultimate goal of annihilation of ego, clear pointers are given here in the Gita, and we can recognize these pointers if we understand Bhagavan's teachings. So generally, you're finding commentaries on these verses. People will say, this is the pratyahara limb of yoga, talking about here, withdrawing the mind from all its objects. But no, this is the ultimate practice of yoga, which is fixing our mind on ourselves. And the fact that that is the ultimate practice of yoga is what Bhagavan makes clear in verse 14 of Upadesha. The mind will subside if we control the breath, but it will be destroyed only if we send it on the investigating path.
And that applies for all ways. I mean, that applies in no matter how you end up subsiding the mind. not just with the breath-related technique, but no matter how you subside the mind, you
there's
still
only
have to
one
use
way
that
to bring
substance.
about the permanent dissolution of mind, and that is atma-vichara.
Exactly.
The mind dissolves in so many ways. The mind dissolves every night. We attain chitta-vritti nirodha seemingly effortlessly every night when we fall asleep. That is only a state of maṉal-ē. We attain chitta-vritti nirodha. If we have a car accident, have a head injury, we'll go into a coma. That's a state of chitta-vritti nirodha, but it's only maṉal-ē. To bring about the permanent chitta-vritti nirodha, the mano-nasa, the only way is to cut the root problem. The root is ego, the false awareness, I am this body. That's why in the verse we talked about last month, verse 13, Bhagavan said this destruction of this false awareness, I am this body, that is all good things. Any good thing you can imagine, all are achieved simply by cutting the root, by cutting this false awareness, I am this body.
I don't know who the questioner is. It just says home. Who is that? Can you identify yourself?
Okay. It is me. It is me, Sanjay Lumia.
Oh, okay, Sanjay. Okay.
I think my name is not there in.
Yeah, your name says home. Maybe you are in home.
No.
We are all trying to go home. You got there
exactly.
We are in home. We are in home, but not in home.
Yeah, okay.
Home, but not in home, not in our actual home.
The trouble is we've made our home in this body.
Right.
We need to make our home in the heart.
Yes.
So next question, I'll go to Stuart. Stuart, can you go ahead with your question, please? Stuart?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Yeah, we can hear it. Go ahead, please.
Hey guys, this is slightly off topic, but nothing really is. I've been listening to a lot of the translated prayers that Bhagavan gave to us, and I wonder, the prayer seems to involve dualistic thinking. And if so, it's like, obviously it's the ego that's praying to the self, I suppose, but isn't the self always giving what the ego wants? Do you see my question? Or not wants, needs
Yes,
for freedom.
Everything that we need is being given to us, but we need to be willing to accept it. What prayer is doing, that is what Bhagavan has prayed for example, in Aksharamlai and other songs of Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. He's praying for what Arunachal wants to give us, what he wants to give us. So by praying for that, we are attuning our will to his will.
Okay.
So Bhagavan wants to give us moksha here and now. But why doesn't Bhagavan give us moksha here and now? Because we don't want it. So these prayers are, we are trying to attune our will to his will. Because only when our will is perfectly attuned to his will, will we be willing to surrender ourselves completely and receive what he wants to give us.
Right.
So prayer is all about channeling or attuning our will to his will.
Right. Okay. So then I am correct in the idea that it's always being given, but it's not a question of freely accepting it. It's a question of not resisting it.
Yes, we can say that. Yes, our very rising as ego is resisting it.
Yeah.
We need to let go.
Right.
But we can let go of everything else only by holding on to ourselves.
Right. So the prayer is that my ego mind is basically saying, I'm willing to dissolve, I'm willing to let go.
Yeah. Or we are trying to make ourselves willing. We're trying to, we are trying to, we're trying to accept the idea. But if we want to be happy, we have to surrender ourselves. We have to give up everything.
Right. So he's modeling that behavior for us.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you,
He's
Michael.
showing us what we should be constantly aspiring for.
Right. And then the thoughts and feelings that accompany that aspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Right.
Solves a lot of questions.
Right.
Thank you, Michael. So the question is, the emotions sometimes are so strong that they overwhelm the investigation, the who am I investigation. That's the question from Ram.
To whom are to whom or for whom are all the emotions? That is what Bhagavan is teaching us in this verse. Whatever problem may arise, we need to investigate to whom does it rise. Investigating to whom means we need to turn our attention back towards ourselves, the one to whom all these emotions and other things rise. It's a matter of constantly turning our attention back to ourselves. Yes, when emotions are strong, our attention tends to flow out to them very strongly. But however strong the emotions may be, we need to constantly be remembering to turn our attention back to ourselves. Because emotions are phenomena. They appear and they disappear, so they're not real. To whom do they appear and disappear? Only by investigating to whom will we find the reality that underlies all these things. Because all phenomena depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. If we investigate ourselves, we find our own reality, and our own reality is the reality underlying everything. That is, all phenomena are based on ego. Ego is based on pure being, which is what we actually are. That's why constantly turning our attention back towards ourselves is the solution to all problems.
Okay, so thank you, Michael. Michael, Tomaino, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. What does subside mean exactly?
What do you understand? What did the word subside suggest to you?
Michael, go ahead.
Hi, Michael. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes.
Well, I've looked up the definition, and I've actually screenshotted the definition, and I look at it frequently, and I like the idea of it actually I'm gonna bring it up real quick, of it being like sediment settling, and so to me it means to slow down or come to more of a stop, and maybe even relax would be another way, and so that's why I was curious what your definition of it is too, since I remember that you in one of your talks you said that that's the summary of Ramana's teachings.
Yes.
And so I thought that was pretty important to understand what you mean, because interpretations can be so different.
Yes. That is, we need all the words of Bhagavan's teachings are pointers. But it's up to us to understand what they are pointing at. So when we first read Bhagavan's teachings, we understand a certain amount. But the more we put it into practice, the more the wording of his teaching becomes meaningful to us. So subside is, if you want me to explain it, I would say subside is the opposite of rise. When we wake up in the morning, we are rising from a state of being, a state of just being, into a state of activity. So that is the rising of ego brings about a rising of everything else, because everything else arises only in the view of ego. So our aim is, the opposite of rising is subsiding, going back down. So we can view it as subsiding as sinking back into our heart, sinking back into our own being. The words rise and subside, we also talk about a storm. A storm is rising, and then it subsides. After the storm is over, it subsides. So ego is a storm. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we are caught up in a constant whirl of thoughts. By thoughts, I mean not just the mental chatter that's going on, but according to Bhagavan, all phenomena are thoughts. So all the perceptions, all the memories, all the feelings, all the emotions, all the likes and dislikes, these are all thoughts. They're all of a storm. There's a verse in Aksharamala where Bhagavan says, so that I protect me so that I shouldn't be like a ship tossing about in a great storm without a helmsman. So the state of samsara is a state of storm. This samsara arises when we arise as ego. It will subside when we subside. So Bhagavan's teachings are all about bringing about the subsidence of ego. Subsidence we can take settling down, sinking, ceasing. I mean, there are many words that are pointing at that, that are pointing towards that, but we have to feel it within ourselves. That these words, we, so to speak, need to go beneath the words to understand what the words actually are. If someone points at the moon, we don't look at the pointing finger. We try to look at what the finger is pointing towards. Likewise with these words, we try to get a feel of what Bhagavan is pointing at. So Bhagavan often uses words in Tamil that mean subside. He also uses other words that mean sink. Sink and subside amount to more or less the same. Often the word that means sink, they're often in English books translated as dive. But I think dive is not such a, to me, dive doesn't feel so right as sinking. That is, when we attend to ourselves, we are not actively diving, but by attending to ourselves, we bring about this passive subsidence, so to speak. But it's a matter of the feel of the words. And each one of us has to feel these words for ourselves. I mean, we can give definitions, but whether the definitions actually help us to understand more, just try to put into practice attending to yourself. When we allow our attention to go outwards, it's like we get caught up in a great storm of so many thoughts, so many worries, so many preoccupations, so many anticipations and worries about the future, so many regrets about the past, so many things are going in our minds, so long as we allow it to go outwards. But when we, to the extent to which we turn our mind back within, there is a subtle subsidence, a subtle, everything calms down, we calm down. There's a word Murugan often uses in Guru Vachika Kovai and other places, upashantam. And just the other day, I was looking up the meaning of upashantam. Upashantam obviously means peace or pacification, but it also means the cessation. So the pacification of a storm is its cessation. So subsidence also means pacification. It also means cessation. So all these, as I say, they're all pointers, but we have to feel within ourselves what they're pointing towards. Was that answer helpful in any way or not at all? Am I just babbling gibberish?
Oh, I thought it was absolutely beautiful, because I actually saved that clip where you talked to somebody else about the power of subsiding. I saved that as an MP3 to listen to every day, and I've found that as I inquire more into myself, that there is like a peaceful place inside of me, and that when I get riled up with something, that if I focus on relaxing and subsiding, that I can subside into that place. And that's why I really like the imagery of the definition of the sediment, like floating down and coming towards the bottom, because that's kind of how I am, and it almost makes me think that I'm like, what I'm going into or going under is the vasanas. It's like that, like that's what it's kind of drifting beneath.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Renu is asking a question. I seem to have a natural inclination to Ishtadeva, the chosen deity, that helps me to turn within and fix in the self during meditation. Rest of the time is spent in contemplation when possible. Is this method okay? Because self, God, Guru is all the same.
Anything that helps us to turn our mind within is beneficial. It is good for the mind to be attached to an Ishtadeva. Ishtadeva means a particular form of God that appeals to us. Because yoga, spiritual practice of any type, is all a movement towards oneness. So people who are spiritually immature will worship many names and forms of God. Any temple, any church that's available, they'll go there. But as our mind as we go deeper in this spiritual path, we have more and more inclination towards oneness. For example, for many of us, we can say Bhagavan is our Ishtadevata, Bhagavan Ramana, because Bhagavan is our guru, and we just feel so strongly drawn to him because of our love for his teachings. But we also understand the same Bhagavan Ramana is the one who appeared as Krishna, the one who appeared in so many different names and forms. So who doesn't have love for Krishna? Everyone had. If you know about Krishna, you can't help but love him. But from our point of view, it is our Bhagavan Ramana who appeared then in the form of Bhagavan Krishna, giving those teachings to Arjuna in the chariot. Murugan, in fact, has sung Tiruvundia in Ramana Sandhi, in which he talks about various leelas of various different forms of God. And all of them, it is Bhagavan who played this leela. So I'm not saying that Bhagavan has to be your Ishtadevata. Whatever your Ishtadevata is, that's a very good focus point. And ultimately, God cannot be something other than I. Because if God was something other than I, God would thereby be limited. So God has to be the reality of ourself. So if we understand that whatever be the particular form of God that appeals to us, that God is shining within us, the primary form of that God is I. Bhagavan often used to say, the first and foremost name of God is I. That implies that the first and foremost form of God is I, is what that word I refers to. So if we understand that our Ishtadevata, whether it be Krishna or Rama or Jesus or whoever it may be, that is what is shining in our heart as I. If we have that understanding, our mind will be drawn more and more to look within. So if that is what you're doing, yes, anything that will help you turn your mind within is good. That is the ultimate aim of all spiritual practices.
Thank you, Michael. That was very nice. I mean, I'm trying my best, but this is, in order to get that in order to get that all-consuming love for something that I know we are experiencing it every minute of our life, because we know it is because of that light that we can see everything, and this experience is even possible. But in order to develop that all-consuming love for that, like, listening to music or reading Ramana's teachings or something, the love for it increases. Whereas if I just sit for meditation without trying to not think about anything else, it becomes like, immediately the mind takes on to other things that I can think about that has already happened because of my ego. So this immediate thought of this Ishtadevata that I have, immediately, like, all the other thoughts are kind of out of the picture. So as I've been doing this, I feel like I come into that quiet space quickly. So but at the same time, I was just wanting to be sure if this is the right way, or when I sit for meditation, should I be doing self-inquiry to calm down? Because I mean, that teaching is also like, because sometimes I do that, and that has also helped me to come to the calmer state.
Yes. That is, Bhagavan has shown us the way so clearly. Bhagavan's Ishtadeva is Arunachala. And we can see in Arunachala Stuti Panchakam how much Bhagavan's love is focused on Arunachala. But at the same time, throughout Aksharam Layam Yava hymns, he's constantly emphasizing and reminding us that Arunachala is what is always shining in the heart. Arunachala is what is dancing in the heart as I. Arunachala is so. Though Bhagavan is teaching us how to have love for an external form as a focal point for our love, but to recognize that what appears in that outward form is what is always shining in our heart as I. So this love for an outward form is not, if it is channeled correctly, it can be a great aid for turning our mind within, with the proper understanding. But what appears outwardly in the form of that Ishtadevata is what is ever shining in our heart as I. So our love for the name and form of the Ishtadevata gives us more and more love to turn within, to find the true form of that Ishtadevata, which is what is always shining in our heart as I.
Okay. I think that way I can just continue what I'm doing. I guess it is a good thing.
Yes. Love is the key. Love, whatever way we look at it, love is the key. Love is what is absolutely important, because we won't turn our mind within without all-consuming love, because the very nature of the mind is to go outwards. So it will be willing to turn within only when it is by his grace, when it gets that all-consuming love. That's why Manikavasika sings in Shiva Puranam, Avanaralale Avantal Vanangi, worshipping him only by his grace.
Yes, that's totally true. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you,
and the most perfect worship, as Bhagavan made clear, is to turn our attention within. That is the ultimate worship.
And that's
because by turning our mind within, we are subsiding. That is giving ourselves to God, giving ourselves to our Ishtadevata.
Right. Thank you, Michael. So the next question is related to this. It seems the who am I, the investigation needs to be relentless 24/7. If I relent just a little, the mind is coming back. Thought grows really fast.
Yes.
I tend to mechanically ask, who am I sometimes?
Asking who am I is not self-investigation. if you ask who am I, you should use that question as a reminder to turn your attention back towards yourself. Otherwise, if we just ask the question, it's just a set of words, a little bit of mental activity. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? That is not the point. The point is, when Bhagavan talks about investigating who am I, he means turning our attention back towards ourselves. In the 16th paragraph of ṇāṉa, Bhagavan gives a very clear and unambiguous definition of Atma-vichara. He says the name Atma-vichara is only for always, as you say, always, relentless. He says sada kalamam, that means always keeping the mind on oneself. So it's not a matter of asking questions. We are not just asking who am I, we're investigating who am I. And the way to investigate who am I is to keep our attention fixed on ourselves, keep our mind fixed on ourselves. Sadakalamum manate anma vilve tirupatikutan atma vichara mendrupaya. That's the words of Bhagavan in Tamil. It's such a clear and unequivocal definition of what is Atma-vichara. It is simply keeping our mind fixed on ourselves. And that should be always. There he uses the term sadakalamum. In another place, in the 11th paragraph of ṇāṉa, he says, Oruvan tan sarupam adeyam varayil, nirantara swarupa smaranaye kai patrubanayin adu andre podum. That means until one attains swarupa, until one attains one's own real nature, if one clings firmly to nirantara, nirantara means unceasing, unbroken, swarupa smarana, remembrance of oneself, in other words, self-attentiveness, that alone is sufficient. So Bhagavan never said we should meditate for 10 minutes morning and evening. If people ask, how often did Bhagavan say we should do this? He said we should do it nirantara, sadakalamam, always, without a break. Of course, none of us are achieving that, but that is what that should be our aim. Because nothing is so important as this. All the external, as Bhagavan made clear, the whole external life is going on according to prarabdha. So we don't have to worry about it. If we are to have 3 meals tomorrow, we'll have 3 meals tomorrow. If we're to starve tomorrow, we'll starve tomorrow. All these things, there's no point in thinking about our external life. There's no point in worrying about how to pay the bills and everything. If the bills are destined to be paid, they'll be paid. If they're not destined to be paid, they won't be paid. So it's all the external life is already predetermined. So we need not concern ourselves with that. What we need to concern ourselves with is turning our mind within, keeping it constantly facing inwards. Of course, it's easy to say this, and I think if any of us are honest, we have to admit we are failing miserably. But this is what we should be aiming for. So long as we're aiming for this, so long as we're trying to be self-attentive as much as possible, we are moving in the right direction. Bhagavan said, not even a moment of this self-attentiveness will go to waste. So every moment of self-attentiveness, we are moving gradually closer to our final destination of knowing and being what we actually are.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Bruce is asking a question here. Becoming food to God is seeing both oneself and God. In other words, ego being swallowed and consumed entirely by the infinite light of pure awareness is alone real seeing. He's quoting your translation from somewhere. So does this mean to die? I think he's comparing this with Annamaya Kosa. What does that compare with Annamaya Kosa?
Annamaya Kosha is just the physical body. That has nothing to do with it. It is The problem is not the physical body. The problem is not even the mind. The problem is the I that rises and takes this physical body and mind to be itself. So what needs to be swallowed is that I that rises as I am this body. What will remain when this I am the body is swallowed, what will remain is what always exists, which is I am.
Right. Bruce, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to, there's the literal, Annamaya Kosha is the literal layer of food is how it's referred to, the sheath of food. And I wanted to expand, the way I concluded it was, does this mean to die to the Annamaya Kosha? But of course that means the body element, but I guess I'm on some level I'm a little hung up on this idea of the becoming food and the maybe it's a hangover from fasting. I don't know.
Becoming food is a beautiful way of, it's a very poetic way Bhagavan put it. But what it means is the dissolution of this false identification, I am this body. In other words, the dissolution
That's pretty much
of ego.
Thanks.
To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, these adjuncts will drop off, these upadhis, the body and mind and all these things, these will drop off because these upadhis are not holding us. The body is not binding us. The world is not binding us. We have bound ourselves to this body and world by our attachment. So we need to give up this abhimanam, this attachment and identification to the body as I. So it's the abhimanam, that this identification, this attachment that needs to be swallowed. And that will be swallowed only when we know ourselves as we actually are.
Thank you, Michael. So give me 1 second. I'm pulling it through.
We can say one more thing. Bhagavan says, becoming food is seeing. We can also, that equally well means seeing is becoming food. That is, by seeing ourselves as we actually are, we thereby become food to ourselves. We thereby cease to exist as a separate thing. Because what we actually are can never be an object of knowledge. We can know ourselves only by being ourselves. And by being ourselves, that means being what we actually are, we thereby cease being this, what we now take this ego, which is what we now seem to be. So without the dissolution of ego, we cannot know what we actually are. And we cannot dissolve ego without knowing what we actually, they're the same thing. It's not that we need to dissolve ego to see what we actually are. We need to see what we actually are to dissolve ego, because the two are one and the same. Seeing what we actually are is the dissolution of ego.
Right. Bruce, I hope this is clear.
Yeah, thanks.
So now we'll move on to the yōgam. Thank you. So let's move on to the next question. Shohan is asking, Bhagavan said, go the way you came. So then if my ego was built on pain, how do I face pain again going back?
When Bhagavan says go the way you came, it means go back to the place you came from. What is the place we came from? We as ego have risen from our being. So going back the way we came means subsiding. It doesn't mean we have to go through pain and everything. So long, pain is something other than ourselves. So long as we are in pain, our attention is on something other than ourselves. We need to withdraw. To whom is this pain? That is the way to go back the way we came. Only when we came out of the heart did pain appear. When we ask ourselves, or when we investigate to whom did this pain appear, we thereby subside back into the heart from which we arose.
So the reason I was asking the question, Michael, was
Yes.
because the ego, if you imagine the ego to be building up, right, step by step, and if it's built on pain or painful events, you know, usually painful events move you more and makes you remember it more, makes you think about it more and more, right?
Yes.
So if the pain created that ego, and if you have to destroy that part, do you have to go through some other pain for that, or
you're putting the cart before the horse? Ego is not built on pain. Pain is built on ego. When we don't rise as ego, there's no pain. Pain is a phenomena that appears only in the view of ego. So ego is the ground, the basis of pain. So we can, going the way we came means returning to our being. It doesn't mean going through pain or anything. Returning to our being, we are turning away from pain, back towards ourselves. Is that clear or not clear?
Yes, actually, that makes a lot of sense, because the more we are egoistic about certain thing, the more we feel pain about a certain thing.
Yeah.
Right? If we love our car so much, a scratch, you know, gives us a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being egotistical about something means grasping that thing very strongly, identifying with that thing. That is what is called, in Sanskrit, it's called abhimanam. It's that. There's no exact word in English for abhimanam. It includes both identification and attachment. So if you're proud, I've got a beautiful car, better car than my neighbor, you've got that attachment. This is my car. It belongs to me. So it's all about ahankara, mamakara. The I am mine is at play there. Actually, nothing is ours. Even this body that we so proudly take to be I, even this body is not I. So how can the car be mine when the body isn't I? The car seems to be mine because I take myself to be this body, and this body has a name, and that car is registered in the name of this body, and so I identify, this is my car. But all this I am mine, it's built on such a flimsy foundation, on this false identification with ourselves as a body. You can own a car, you can own 100 cars, you can own palaces, you can have all the wealth in the world. But one day this body is going to die, and when the body dies, you are thereby separated from all these things. Now we have yoga with this body. And so we have yoga with all our possessions, with all our identity, with all our everything that we take to be I and mine. We have we have yoga with it. When death comes, we will have forcible viyoga from all these things, but we forcibly separated from these things. So Bhagavan advises us, separate from it now by holding on to that from which you can never be separated. That is your own being. Everything else we will be separated from it sooner or later, whether we want to be or not.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
So we need to voluntarily die while this body is still living. And we can voluntarily die only by letting go of everything else, by holding on to our own being.
Thank you, Michael. The next question I have here is going to, attending to, investigating, scrutinizing the source of I, the origin of I, the place of the arising of I, the same as attending to or investigating or scrutinizing I?
What is the place from which I rises? The I that rises is ego, the false awareness, I am this body. From where can this arise except from the fundamental awareness I am, which is our own being? So the source from which ego has arisen is our own being. That is what when Bhagavan says investigate the source from which the place, he in Tamil the word he uses often is idam or sthanam, which is a Sanskrit word. It literally means place, the place from which we've risen. In ṇāṉa, in the 6th paragraph of ṇāṉa, he talks about pirapidam, the birthplace. What is the birthplace of ego? It is our own being, that from which we have risen when we wake up in the morning, and that into which we subside when we fall asleep at night. That is ourself, our own being. So that is what we need to attend to. And we cannot attend to ego without attending to that, because ego is that same fundamental awareness I am, mixed and conflated with adjuncts is ego. But when we try to attend to ego, we're not attending to the adjuncts, to the body and mind and other things that we identify as I. We're attending to the heart of ego, which is I. So I am is both the source and the substance of ego. It is the place from which ego rises. And even when we have risen as ego, it is the substance, it's the source, it's the very being of ego, the underlying reality of ego. So different words may be used, but they're all pointing to the one thing, pointing our attention back towards ourself, our own being, this fundamental awareness, I am.
Can I ask that was my question. And
yeah.
So is that true, the source of like each thought? So if I have a thought and I say, okay, what was the source of that? Is that the same if it's just a thought, regardless of the thought? Is that the same and I can go to that and I can look to the source and and it quiets me. Is that the same as who am I? Look to the source of the I. So looking to the source of the thought, is that the same?
It is the same, but if we analyze it a little bit more deeply, all thoughts arise from the first thought I. So ego is the source of all thoughts. But the source of ego is the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. The source from which that arises is the pure awareness I am. So the immediate source of all thoughts is ego. And the source of ego is I am. So the ultimate source of everything is I am. So they're all pointing, it's all pointing in the same direction. It's pointing back towards ourselves. The source from which we have risen cannot be anything other than ourselves. We ourselves are the source from which we have risen as ego.
Thank you, Michael. So the last question, today's session. If Atma is our fundamental nature, the minute we think about it, we should go back immediately to that fundamental state. Why does it take so much self-inquiry it seems mind is something that always works towards opposing or attempts to go back to the self. Is mind also created by Atma?
But dharma of Atma, of mind, is to go outwards. Our dharma, our swadharma, is to go inwards. So long as because we now seem to be mind, it seems to be our nature to be constantly going outwards, but that is not our real nature. The more we turn within, the more the inclination to go outwards will get weakened, and the inclination to go inwards will get strengthened. The inclination to go outwards is what is called vishaya vasanas, because vishayas means all objects or phenomena. So everything other than ourselves that we attend to, they are vishayas. So the inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves is what is called vishaya vasana. The inclination to attend to ourselves, to our own being, is what is called sat vasana. We could, if we had sufficient love, we could attend to ourselves and dissolve back into our source here and now, permanently dissolve. But because we still have such strong vishaya vasanas, we are not willing to let go. So when we are trying to attend to ourselves, we are attending to ourselves, but our self-attentiveness is still imperfect. Our attention isn't wholly on ourselves. We are still not letting go entirely of all other things. So we need to practice and practice and practice until this inclination goes outward. That is, the more we practice, the more the inclination to go outwards is weakened, and the love to go back within is strengthened. But finally, when that love to go within becomes stronger than the liking to go outwards, then we will have sufficient love to merge back into our source, and then all that is, when ego is destroyed, all its vishaya vasanas are destroyed along with it. But until then, we need to persevere in the practice. That's why Bhagavan says in the beginning of the 11th paragraph, so long as vishaya vasanas exist in the mind, so long the investigation, who am I, is necessary. So that means so long as we have even the slightest inclination to attend to anything whatsoever other than our own being, so long this investigation, we need to persevere in this investigation. And we will, so long as until ego is destroyed, we will continue to have that inclination to attend to other things. Only when ego is destroyed will all the vishaya vasanas be destroyed along with it. Until then, by our practice, we are gradually weakening the vishaya vasanas and strengthening the sat vasana. But we will destroy the vishaya vasanas entirely only when we only when by constant practice we gain the love. We gain enough love to turn the full 180 degrees and therefore merge forever back into our source. So only when ego is destroyed will all the vasanas be destroyed with it. Until then, we are cutting away at the leaves and branches. Those leaves and branches will continue sprouting. But that's why we have to continue cutting until we finally get access to the root and cut the root. If you've got a very dense bush, the only way to get rid of that dense bush is to cut the root. But you can't cut the root because of all the leaves and branches. So you first have to cut back the leaves and branches to a considerable extent before you can get at the root. Likewise, we need to reduce the strength of the vishaya vasanas to a considerable extent before we can gain enough love to destroy ego, to let go of everything and merge back into our source. I hope that was a clear answer to that question. Nothing is stopping us knowing and being ourselves here and now, except our own liking to continue rising and going outwards. So the whole problem is with ourselves. We have a problem and we have a solution. We have a problem in the sense that we are clinging to other things. The solution is to cling to ourselves. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Center.